Hello, everyone. It's wonderful to see so many people tuning in from all over the country, actually, not just Nebraska and Kansas, but all over. My name is Chris Summerick. I'm Executive Director of Humanities Nebraska, and welcome to what is our sixth Curiosity Connections program this year, is kind of celebrating our 50th anniversary and doing these special monthly online programs. And for this one, we went to our friends at Humanities Kansas and teamed up. So it's wonderful to always be working with our counterparts around the country. And Humanities Kansas is a wonderful humanities council and helped us put together a terrific program today. So in a moment, I'll be introducing our moderator for today and getting out of the way. But I just wanted to say also thanks to Beth and Kelvin Whited for funding this program today. And also, I see a lot of you are already putting your names in the chat and everything. So feel free, if you haven't already, say hello and where you're from in the chat. We're going to be using that quite a bit today, looking at comments and questions. I also want to encourage you, it's easier to track questions when you use the Q&A box. So I will keep an eye on that as well. But if you throw them in the chat, we'll try to catch them there as well. So, Humanities Nebraska was created 50 years ago to help people explore what connects us and makes us human. Incidentally, Humanities Kansas is 1 year older than us, so they're 51 right now. One way that we as human beings are curious about the world, about the world around us, is through doing things like this. So thank you for being part of it. We're here to explore today some very important and lesser known stories of hope and resilience of Black communities established here on the Great Plains, with primary examples in Nicodemus, Kansas, and DeWitty, Nebraska. And you'll be hearing more about that. I'll leave the rest of the description to the others. And I wanted to turn it over to a wonderful moderator here for us who will take it from here. And the moderator for this important conversation, who will also bring in our other panelists, Angela Bates and Denise Scales, is Donna Rae Pearson from Kansas. She is a collection development specialist at the Kansas Museum of History, which is run by the Kansas Historical Society. She has previous experience as a local history librarian for the Topeka and Shawnee County Public Libraries, and she's also a speaker for Humanities Kansas. So Donna Rae, I know you're involved in a lot of other really interesting things too. So please share anything else about yourself that you would like to, and then everybody can meet our other speakers after that. So thank you, Donna Rae. Take it away.
Oh, thank you, Chris. I'm happy to be here today. I mean, when I heard about this program, I got super excited because this is a topic that isn't talked about very much. Not much more about me, except I'm excited. Next year is the 70th anniversary of Brown versus Board, so keep a lookout for information coming out about that. But really today, I want to focus on the early settlers of Kansas and Nebraska. And we have two great descendants from both communities in Nebraska, and DeWitty, Nebraska, and Nicodemus, Kansas. So I'm going to start out having them introduce themselves and tell their connections to these towns. So Angela Bates, I could see if Angela and Denise could turn on their cameras, that would be awesome. And Angela, if you want to go ahead and get started telling us a little bit about who you are and your connection to Nicodemus.
Okay. First of all, I want to say thank you for the opportunity to share this rich history. It's always great to have a great audience that's interested in hearing what we have to say. So I want to say thank you for the invite. My name's Angela Bates. I'm a fourth generation descendant of the initial settlers that settled here at Nicodemus in 1877. My great grandmother was a lady by the name of Zarina Johnson, and her husband Tom came with the first group in 1877. And so I'm a descendant of them, and their daughter had the first baby born in Nicodemus, Emma. And Emma's second son is my grandfather. So I'm a descendant of those brave pioneer settlers. I started the Nicodemus Historical Society in 1988. and helped to get Nicodemus designated as a unit of the National Park Service in '96. And for the last 30 some years have been working to collect, preserve, and interpret the history of Nicodemus and share it with the world.
Wow, 30 years?
30
That goes,
plus. Yes.
yeah, that's a long time.
Yes.
Okay. Denise Scales, you're with DeWitty, Nebraska. Could you tell us a little bit about your connection to DeWitty?
Yes, so again, my name is Denise Scales, and I am a descendant of DeWitty, Nebraska. We were able to trace our family back 7 generations. And so in 2016, the Historical Society recognized DeWitty as an historical landmark. And from there, we created the Descendants of DeWitty nonprofit. And so William P. Walker was my grandfather, who was one of the settlers of the DeWitty settlement. And if me personally, I have a degree in criminal justice. I graduated from Creighton in 2017 with the leadership background. And so our mission is to keep this story alive. And also in our historical reenactment, I have incorporated my grandchildren to guarantee that this story is passed down from generation to generation.
Yeah, yes, the intergenerational aspect of that is rich. That's the only way you can keep those stories going. If I understand correctly, both of these towns, both of your ancestors, used the Homestead Act to start the development. I'm going to start off with you, Denise. Can you tell me kind of the who, what, and when and where of how your people decided on DeWitty and how they got there and when that happened and everything?
Yeah, so William P. Walker's mother, she was a runaway slave. So and she left Kentucky and went to Ohio, which was the free state. So the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 caused them to get back onto the Underground Railroad. They went across the Detroit River into Canada, what is known as North Buxton, Ontario, Canada. And then, which is the Black homestead that still exists today. And every year in September, they have a week-long celebration to honor everyone who made their way across into Canada. And so after the Emancipation Act of 1863-65, William was able to convince they said about 11 families to come back to Nebraska because of the Homestead Act of 1862. And then their first stop was Overton, Nebraska, where they stayed for many years. He also met his wife, Sarah, in North Buxton. They were married and they had 3 children. So they traveled back with them. And their first stop was Overton, Nebraska. But Sarah died in Overton. And then that's when he married Charlotte Hatter Riley. And then they are the ones who actually lived in DeWitty.
Oh, so it was 11 families that founded this community then?
Yeah, so they all came down from North Buxton, and their first stop was Overton, where they received 160 acres of land. And then, the Kincaid Act offered the 640 acres of land. And that's when everyone decided to move to DeWitty, which is called the Sand Hills of Nebraska.
Wow, so they actually had the resources to buy this land then, in other words.
Well, it was for a small filing fee. They had to stay on the land for 5 years to improve it. They also took advantage of the Timber Culture Act, where they had to plant trees. So they made it, I don't know if I can say they made it easy for them, but, they had a lot of help from the government so that they could survive.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Angela, I think the story in Nicodemus is similar but different. Can you
Yes.
tell me about that?
Well, Nicodemus was conceived, I think initially by the white man by the name of W.R. Hill, who was a land agent for the railroad companies. And he had helped people to get settled in Wichita and Hutchinson, and then he ventured out here to the western part of the state on these tours. And he, this area had not been settled. And of course, people were settling along the rivers because of obvious reasons. And the railroads were looking at laying the track through this area coming from Salina. So they were creating a new line that left Salina, which is the central part of the state, and moving along where the people was beginning to settle along the Solomon River, all the way out to Colby. And then they were creating a short line back to Oakley. So as they were thinking about doing this, W.R. Hill conceived of the idea of creating a town and naming it after himself and getting the county organized. Well, he met a black man by the name of Smith, who was a homesteader, convinced him to go into partnership with them. Then they went to Topeka, met 4 ministers, and they collaborated and created the Nicodemus Town Company. And so they said, well, where are we going to get people to settle in our town, which is going to be named Nicodemus after the song Nicodemus, which was it was called Wake Nicodemus, Wake Him Up for the Great Jubilee. And he was an African-American prophet who talked about a better time coming. So they named the town Nicodemus, located it on the north side of the Solomon River, and of course, in the promised lands of Kansas. So they decided they were going to go back home, and home was Kentucky. And they went to the central bluegrass area, went to the churches, solicited people to actually migrate out and help to settle the town, as well as obviously homestead, rather than staying in the Jim Crow South. And so about 350 people in that initial year came out. September the 17th is when the first real group from Kentucky arrived. And then subsequent groups came in the spring, the following spring. And then 1879 was when really the last group of people came. So that's how the town of Nicodemus was actually settled.
Okay, I get it. Now, what I'm finding interesting is that both towns picked rural areas. Angela, how did they build the town? What did it look like? Because from what I know of Western Kansas, there are not many trees out there, right?
Yes, we're on the high plains of Kansas, on the real edge of the high plains of Kansas. And of course, people will say Kansas is flat, and it's really the fact that you can see for miles because there are no trees, especially out here. So the typical dwelling that people lived in at that point all over were dugouts. And, you'd find an embankment, or you would create one, and you would dig basically a hole in the ground or in an embankment, 6 feet deep by about 12, 16 feet long and wide, and use whatever you could to make a roof, a door. Sunflowers, weeds, and what have you were used to protect themselves from the elements. And that's what they typically lived in until they got a plow on the town site. Then they started using your typical sod houses, which were made from the virgin soil of Kansas.
Right, soddies, I think is what they're sometimes called.
Yes.
And Denise, I think it sounded kind of similar, since they were using the timber act and planting trees. Where were your people living when they first got there?
Yeah, so they started off with sod houses as well. And then because of the Kincaid Act, the rail system was also brought in through Western Nebraska. So they were able to get some supplies in that way also. So they that helped them to build actually frame houses with pane windows as well. But they started off in sod houses as well. But I was told that their floors were made of, they put fur on their floor. That was their carpet. So they lived by the North Loop River. So they had plenty of wild game and fishing, and that's pretty much how they survived. And of course, they had the wooden stove to keep them warm in the winter time. And so you have to remember they came from Canada, so they were used to the severe winter. So that was an advantage for them when they came to Nebraska as well. And we know in the sand hills, you also have those sand hills. And so Williams on his property, when you see where his house was, it was actually behind a sand hill to protect him from the elements. So it was like Little House on the Prairie, if you remember Little House on the Prairie.
I do actually. I am of that era.
Me
And
too.
that actually is a good point. I'm happy you brought that up in terms of the element and the conditions, because again, coming from Kentucky, going to Western Kansas, we're talking about a totally different environment. Do you
Absolutely.
know how your ancestors adjusted to that, Angela?
Well, you know, initially, again, they created dugouts, and when they arrived, that first group really arrived in September of 1877. One of the first dugouts that they built was for Emma Johnson, my great grandmother's dugout, because she was 8 months pregnant at the time, and so they built dugouts. But it was very, very difficult for them because even though they were out on the high plains of Kansas and they did live in dugouts, they didn't really have the means to really farm, you know, or even it was too late in the season to actually plant a garden. So they almost starved that first year. It was people that did come and assist them, and specifically the Potawatomi Indians came and shared their game with them. This was at a time when Indians were still considered hostile. So the Potawatomis came, saw that they were starving, had a little powwow, so to be, meeting the night before they traversed on, and stopped in the community, scared everybody to death, but they were not there to harm them, but they were there to help them by sharing their game. So that first winter or so was really rough for them. It was just really, really rough for them.
All right. Well, okay, so we can establish that they survived it. Both communities got over the hump, so to speak. But then you have to start creating community. What were some of the first institutions that they decided were important to have to create these towns? Either one of you can kind of jump in there.
So
Okay.
so I'll tell you a little bit about DeWitty. So William P. and his family, you know, they came from North Buxton, and North Buxton education was really important to them. And he also had a farm in North Buxton. He was also postmaster from 1877 to 1879. He was a cooper, so he made wooden barrels. And so he was really crafty, you know, he learned that from his father. And because he was postmaster, he kept up with the changing laws in America. And that's how they basically found out about the Kincaid Act. And I forgot the question.
You told me education. It sounded like
Yeah,
education was one of the first things that they decided to create. A school, was it?
They created, they had 3 schools in DeWitty. They had a church, a post office, and a store. And so two of William P.'s daughters were teachers on the DeWitty homestead, as well as other families were teachers as well. But William P. knew that education, land ownership equaled economic freedom for his family and for future generations. So that's one thing he did know. So.
Okay.
Because they, you
Awesome.
know, they owned in DeWitty, there was 30,000 acres of land, and that's
wow.
the same distance between Omaha and Nebraska. And so that's how big DeWitty was at one time.
Wow, that is huge.
Yeah,
I didn't
yeah,
realize it was that
yeah,
big. That's a
yeah,
lot to manage
yeah.
and take care of. Yes. Angela, what happened over in Nicodemus? What was
Well,
some of the first things they decided was important?
Well, same thing. Education was number one priority. There were a few people that could read and write, and they took charge of establishing the schools. Um, Also, the church. They almost established themselves at the same time. I think people had an increased faith in God and relied on God, and they established the churches immediately. Even before they even could even have a place of worship, they would actually do it in their dugouts.
Mhm.
Nicodemus School District number 1 was the first school established in Graham County. And that was because the folks of Nicodemus actually forced the organization of the county, and Nicodemus becomes the first township to be actually organized. So the school in Nicodemus was the first school to be established in Graham County. Like DeWitty, we had a post office, and Fletcher was his name, and his wife Jenny was the first school teacher, and he was the first postmaster. And again, they had all kinds of businesses in Nicodemus. They had, several businesses as it was being established. Took them a while for it to all happen, but they had. It was a typical Western town. They had a doctor's office, a land office, livery companies, hotels, restaurants, millinery shops, name it. It was a typical Western bustling town.
Well, that brings me, I'm curious now, how big did Nicodemus get at some point?
Well, in terms of its population, it varied, but they say in its heyday, which was shortly after it was established, there was about close to 600 people there. But as they were approaching getting the railroad, the population increased just a little bit because they were really soliciting people to actually come to Nicodemus in hopes that the railroad was going to secure more of an economic foundation and future for them. So, but the population, most of the people left the actual town site and moved out into the surrounding area, which was the Nicodemus Township. And the Nicodemus Township is 4 miles by 7 miles. And 90%, or I would even say probably 98% of that land was homesteaded by the Nicodemus settlers.
Okay. So, and I'm also going to ask you, Denise, how large did DeWitty get at some point in time?
So at one point there were 168 families in DeWitty. But some of the land was just so arid, they could not farm on that land. So there was a lot of cattle. They raised they had to go to raising cattle. And then some of them, after a while, because they couldn't grow any vegetables, they left. So they're saying between 1912 and 1915 is when they were really it was a booming a town, but because of the Dust Bowl and the Depression in 1935, that was really the demise of DeWitty.
Well, that's a great segue. That's what I was going to ask about next. Let's be clear, both of these places still exist, okay? And you can still go visit both of these places. I'm going to let you tell about when good opportunities are to do that. But you kind of hinted at some different events that caused the decline in population of DeWitty. Was there any particular events, Angela, that caused the decline of Nicodemus?
Absolutely. Jim Crow at its best.
Wow. Okay.
It was when they didn't secure the railroad. And this is a very interesting story because W.R. Hill was in bed, so to speak, with the railroads. And he knew that he wanted to establish his town in what would be called Graham County. So he established his town in the center of the county, which is more or less what a lot of county seats are. They're not located on the border. Nicodemus was, I believe, strategically selected to be on the eastern border. We're literally sitting right on the eastern border. And as they were bringing the railroad across the what was called the my mind goes blank.
That's fine.
The Plainville branch of the Missouri Pacific that were coming through the area, they had crossed the Paradise Creek, which wound its way through the county, the adjacent county, and they had to build about 26 small bridges. And when they got to the adjacent county, which is Graham County, they basically said they were not in the business of building bridges, and they wanted to definitely build the railroad on the north side of the Solomon River. The north side of the Solomon River is where Nicodemus is. Hill City, which became the county seat, they wanted to make sure that the railroad was going to be definitely on the north side, but they strategically put the railroad on the south side of the river until about a mile or so before they got to Hill City. When the railroad did not materialize in Nicodemus, the little town of Bogue, which is 4 miles to the west, and it's where I live, and one right on the south side of the Solomon River, and it was named after the Virgil Bogue, who was the engineer for the line. When they created the town of Bogue, that pulled out the economic base of Nicodemus. So I think that was strategic, and to me, that was Jim Crow at its best. And then, of course, because they did not get the railroad, and all of the businesses, I won't say all of them, but some of the white businesses that did operate in Nicodemus disassembled their buildings and brought them over to the town of Bogue, for example, the bank. And then from that point on, because of the environment, the Great Depression, the dirty 30s, people continued to leave. And so that's what I believe caused the critical turn and the downward shift of the economic viability for Nicodemus when the railroad did not materialize.
Right, exactly. I mean, for those of you who don't know, the state of Kansas, railroads made or break towns all the time. And so it was imperative that if you're in a small town in Kansas existed, if the railroad line made it to there. So I can definitely see and understand where you're saying they had choices and they chose not to do it. And you have to wonder what were some of the underlying reasons for that. So yes. But again, I said both of your towns still exist. Both of your towns still have historical acknowledgement, or I know yours is on the National Register, and you said, Denise, yours is a historical landmark. Why is this important? Why is it important for these towns to be acknowledged? Angela, if you want to go ahead.
Well, Nicodemus is a National Historic Site, so it's a unit of the National Park Service. There is a difference. The town itself sits on 161 acres, and the town site itself is a historic landmark district. But in 1996, we became a unit of the National Park Service. And so there is a difference there. We have a line item on the budget as being one of the units of the National Park Service. And that happened in 1996. So.
Okay, so why is it important? Well,
it's absolutely important because it's a part of American history that has been overlooked. We have a tendency to concentrate on what happened during slavery and the atrocities of slavery, and then we jump from that into the migration north through the industrial era, and then we also talk about the civil rights. But there's a whole chapter that talks about the experiences of African Americans when they first left the South. They migrated to the West and they started their own all-Black towns. So it is important that that we understand that African Americans were a part of the manifest destiny, so to speak. We were a part of that chapter in history when the country was expanding. And we look at the West and we know there were Indians that were subdued and forced into reservations and all of the Indian wars. And we know about the railroads and the Chinese that came and helped. But we don't think in terms of were there any African Americans. And it wasn't until we started to learn about Buffalo Soldiers that we began to really realize that African Americans populated the West. And so Nicodemus it fits right into that chapter. All of the Black towns that popped up all over the West, including those in Oklahoma, are an important chapter of our American history. And I think it speaks volumes to the tenacity, the vision, and the realization of a dream that African Americans had after they endured slavery and had an opportunity to experience real freedom in their own all-Black town. So it is important that the nation know this history.
You're right. I mean, it's not, there's a certain joy in being able to really literally pick up your life, go across country with little to no resources and make a new living in a totally foreign place. But Denise, I want to understand why you think this history is important to preserve and protect for everybody else.
Well, the Descendants of DeWitty, we had the longest lasting, most successful Black homestead from 1907 to 1936. And the last piece of property was sold in 1993. So it was being leased to the Hannah, who still own the DeWitty land. But I think what makes our story so unique is that DeWitty was an all-Black homestead, but Brownlee was their neighbors, which was the all-white homestead. And so, like they were saying earlier, you know, you had the riots that was going on in Omaha in 1921 and the Tulsa burning, but Brownlee and DeWitty were living in harmony because they understood that survival was more important than their differences. And so that what makes our story so unique. And even today, when we came together in 2016, it was more people from Brownlee who still, after 100 years, we still have that bond. And that's how our story continues to grow. So like when we go to Valentine, Nebraska, we're almost like movie stars. I mean, so it's really kind of funny and awesome, you know, like, so yeah, so we still have that bond with the people in Valentine, Nebraska, and Brownlee. They tell us stories about the past, and we put that in our historical reenactment. So, but you know, again, like I say, it's important to tell our stories so those stories can be passed down from generation to generation, and that's what's more most important to me, and that's why I continue to do what I do. And
Exactly.
other families need to know who they are and what their legacy is, because it's important for everyone, not just William P. Walker, but it's important for every family to know who they are and where they come from.
Exactly. I definitely believe that whose shoulders we stand on, where do we come from, how did we get here is so important. Now, y'all have indulged me in letting me ask all the questions, but I'm sure there's some questions from our audience. Chris, do we have any?
Yes, we do have a couple questions, and I'm just going to give them both to you at the same time, and then you can decide how to go about that. But one is going back to when the families in both cases, in both of these communities first came, the assumption being that they were going to be farming was a part of this, and wondering, Carolyn Harp in Lincoln is wondering, did they bring seed with them and implements with them and things like that to get started? And then a second question was more about as things went on, there was a little bit of reference to the relationship with Native Americans during the conversation already, but how was that ongoing relationship of these settlements with the Native American community who were out there on the plains? And then I'll bring in any other questions after that later too. Thanks.
Okay, so I'm going to reframe that first question a little bit. Do you know what was in the wagon? What was in their suitcase when they came across country?
So,
Angela, do you know?
They came by train.
Okay, there
They
you go.
came by train, and so they did bring some of their some tools, and but they were limited by what they could actually bring on the train. And then the cost of shipping stuff was expensive, obviously. But when they showed up on the town site, they had shovels, pretty much shovels and that kind of thing. And no, they did not bring seeds in terms of the ability to plant crops. The crops were that they grew out here, and that was typical for that time period, was wheat. And so they had gotten the seed from the local folks, probably out of Ellis, where they actually got off the train when they could plant in the spring. But yeah, they did not have tractors and plows, obviously. They borrowed teams of horses from one young man, and they borrowed it for a number of months. And but that's how they got started. I mean, it just took them a while for them to actually plant seeds and grow a crop and grow gardens and that kind of thing. But I'm sure they got a lot of their supplies from right there in Ellis, which is 35 miles south of Nicodemus.
Yeah, it's good to point out that there were other communities around them that they could lean on for some of that initial support when they first got out here. So Western Kansas doesn't have a large population, but there is a population out there, right?
Yes.
So Denise, if I remember correctly, they came from Buxton. So how did they get here, and what did they bring with them?
So they came by wagon. And so what I was told is that they actually brought seed with them to help them survive that first year, because they were already farmers. They lived in Canada. They understood the climate. And so they did bring seed with them that helped them survive the first year. I do know that the first year, William P. had to dig a well. And so that was an issue, although the North Loop River was near to them, water was an issue, and housing was an issue, where they had to find somewhere, to shelter in for the winter. But there was a town close by too that was already, I can't remember the name of the town. And so I'm sure whatever they did not have, they went to the other town to get supplies if they needed them as well.
Okay, thank you. Angela, you briefly touched on already that there was a relationship with Native Americans. Was that ongoing, or
No,
was it just that initial year?
I think it was that initial year. The Potawatomis know for a fact that they were here. I've heard over the years and talked to the Osage, because the Osage have a similar story, that they were actually here helping the people. I don't dispute them at all, because a lot of things that happened were not recorded necessarily. But the Potawatomis definitely were here. We've known the history. And in the early years, or the early 90s, when we established the Nicodemus Historical Society, we always had a family, the Shaw family, that were from Wichita. They were Osage. They actually came and participated in our homecoming celebration. We're always in the parade, and did some demonstrations at times. And then in 1998, when we had the dedication of Nicodemus National Historic Site, we had Al Natonic, who is a Potawatomi, and he came and represented the Potawatomi tribe there. A couple of years ago, we actually had the Potawatomi chairman of the tribe. He actually came and brought the descendants of those men that were a part of the hunting party that brought the food and their game and shared with Nicodemus. So we've honored them here recently with a silhouette of a Potawatomi Indian on a horse, in this big metal silhouette that's probably about 9 feet by about 8 feet high. It sits on a knoll just south of our school, and it's to pay homage to and tribute to their contribution to our survival that first year. We're currently getting a historic sign that's being made right now as we speak. I hope to pick it up by the beginning of next week and actually have it installed, that tells the story of the Potawatomis. And we're hoping to continue to really build on that relationship. Over the years, like I said, we've touched base with them and they've participated, but we're looking forward to really solidify that relationship with a lot more activities and a lot more kinds of things to acknowledge their presence and their story here.
Interesting. Thank you for that. While you were talking, you mentioned something, and I don't know if people know what it is. You said the word homecoming.
Yes.
What is that, and what does that mean?
Well, the Emancipation Celebration has always been celebrated here in Nicodemus. The very first one started in 1878, that August the 1st. And they selected August the 1st because that was the date that many other places were celebrating emancipation. And that was the date of the slaves being freed in the West Indies. Right. So that's why that date was selected. But we've been doing an emancipation celebration, not a Juneteenth, because we got here and we knew that we were emancipated, 2 years prior to those folks in Texas finding out. But we've been having our celebration for years. And in 27, I think it is, we're going to have our 150 emancipation celebration. And so that's a time when people come back from all over the United States that have their roots in Nicodemus. And that's what kind of keeps the families and the cohesiveness of the community, even though there's, less than 20 people that are actually living on the town site now. The history and the descendants are all over the United States, and we come back every year through that emancipation to participate in that emancipation. And that's what keeps the descendant community strong.
No, I've been to that. So the town site is 20 people. How big does it get over that weekend?
It varies. I think the biggest one that I remember having was in 1998 when we had the dedication of Nicodemus National Historic Site. We had over 5,000 people here then. But during the early years and at the turn of the century, it was bigger than the state fair. They said that the company that does the carnivals, they're out of Kinsley, Kansas. They used to say that you hadn't been to a festival or a fair until you've been to the Nicodemus one. It was huge. They had 5,000 to 10,000 people that would show up, and it wasn't just African Americans. It was people that were coming from all over the state of Kansas, Nebraska, and Colorado. People, they had baseball games, they had a boxing match, they had a political platform, they had, of course, the Ferris wheel and games and food vendors, and it was a huge emancipation celebration that everybody participated in.
That's amazing. And folks in the audience, if you haven't been, you should go. Denise, I'm ready for a road trip because I've been to Nicodemus. Do you guys do something similar in DeWitty?
So actually, we do not. In 2016 was the first time we actually came back together, and that was 80 years. And so there was over 200 people at that gathering. And at that gathering, I met family members that I did not know about in 2016. And so that's another reason why we continue to tell our story, because I met 2 family members that I've heard my mom talk about them, but we never actually met. And then I just met Deborah Stone, and she's from the Price family from off of the DeWitty homestead. So as we, move, through our story, we always seem to find descendants of DeWitty. And so that's also our goal. We have a podcast. And so I'm going to feature Deborah Stone on our podcast so she can tell us a little bit what she's discovered about the Price family from the DeWitty homestead. Yeah, so that's what I love about it.
All right, well, we'll have to get the name put into the chat for that. Chris, as we are winding down, I got sidetracked. Are there any more questions we can have answered from the audience?
Yes, the questions have been pouring in. This is going to be tough
Oh no,
to
I'm
get to. Oh,
sorry.
that's good. No, no, it's not because of you. Actually, this is just fabulous. Everybody's loving this conversation. So, one, and you may have seen this in the chat, but Ajamal Bindin kind of asked a couple questions about related to any partnerships that either of you have with academic institutions in Kansas or Nebraska, and such as in the Black Studies or History departments. Is there any kind of ongoing relationship there? And then also about other follow-up on learning about this important history, any articles or books that you would recommend? And then I'll come back with a couple more after that.
Okay, go for it. Angela, if you want to start up.
Well, yes, we have a very solid relationship with the University of Kansas. The Spencer Research Library is where our collection of photographs and written documents are. Back in the early 90s, we found out that one of our cousins had donated a document to the Spencer Research Library. So when we got our first huge collection of historical photographs, I knew we did not need to keep them in my bedroom, my extra bedroom at the time, and it was right before we actually got our little museum house. We selected the University of Kansas, the Spencer Research Library. So they have all of our written documents and photographic documents. We also have a great relationship with K-State. K-State has always been a part of the architectural department and the agricultural department through John Ella Holmes' effort with the Kansas Black farmers. We're always working alongside them to work with them in any capacity that they see that we need to assist them in. But K-State in the initial years with our cousin Verl Schweitzer had a oral history project that was done, and that was done early on, like in 1979, I believe it was, when they actually started doing work there. We also have a great relationship with the local nearby university, and that's Fort Hays State in Hays, Kansas. Right now, we have interns that we get every year throughout the year that assist the Nicodemus Historical Society. And we are working with other universities that have academic programs where the students are interested in writing about Black towns, Black experience in the West, and agriculture. So we have great relationships with several of those academic institutions.
All right, Denise.
So what we've done over the past 7 years, we've been in Omaha Public Schools, so we have a relationship there. We adopted Wakanda Elementary School here in Omaha, so we do historical reenactment. We'll write grants and provide the students and the teachers with whatever they have need of. We've been at, we have a relationship right now with Metro Tech Community College through their intern program. They're helping us to create a computer game for the Descendants of DeWitty, and we've been working with them for over the past year. But our exhibit was at the Durham in 2023. We worked with Creighton University, the National State Park, Stir Museum. I think we've been about everywhere, Western Nebraska, Beatrice. Yeah, and so that's how we survive. You know, we take our 27-piece exhibit and then they'll host it along with our traveling photo exhibit, historical reenactment. We have an animation project. We created a lesson plan for elementary students, and so that's pretty much how we survive. We mostly grants, Omaha Community Foundation, statewide grants and stuff.
Right.
Like that.
So,
Yeah.
so there are ways to access information, and
Yes.
I'm very happy to hear both of you have partnerships with institutions to make sure the research is ongoing. Chris?
Yeah, a couple other things to mention is the Center for Great Plains Studies has some great
Exactly.
Black homesteading, and I believe Angela, I think you wrote the foreword to one of Rick Edwards' books there, and yeah, there she has it. Okay. And they recently put out another publication on Black homesteading, I think a couple of years ago, that was really good. So that's at UNL, if I didn't say, University of Nebraska Lincoln. And then I wanted to give a shout out to Eric Ewing and the Great Plains Black History Museum in Omaha, and Eric's on this. And he pointed out that they are looking to put together a 6-month exhibit on Black homesteaders in the Great Plains. So he's hoping to connect with y'all, and we'll make sure that happens.
I'd like to also add that tomorrow, the Homestead National Historic Site is redoing their film. And so the 2 young men that are working on that will be here over the weekend to shoot some footage and do some interviews that will be added to the new film there at Homestead National Historic Site.
Okay.
Fabulous.
Awesome. That's good to hear. Again, that the connections are still going to be out there in the public. Chris, it looks like we have time for a couple more questions,
Yeah,
maybe.
and I'm toggling between the chat and the Q&A, but there are a couple questions more about the railroad side of things. And one of them was just whether or not you've noticed any other patterns or reasons, more broadly speaking, too, about these communities changing on the Great Plains, these Black homestead communities, and whether or not, is the railroad deciding not to be there the main reason, or are there other factors? And just I don't know, for whatever, and I think that kind of goes along with another question that somebody else asked too. So is there any other comments on railroads? I would say
well, I studied the railroad situation here in Nicodemus a little bit more than I had wanted to. Our last Chautauqua was about the railroad and how it bypassed us. But what's interesting is that W.R. Hill was a land agent for them. And I know that when he selected the site of Hill City, knowing that Pomeroy had promised him that if it became the county seat, he would put money into it. And when the town of Millbrook actually won the county seat fight, of course, Hill was dismayed, but shortly thereafter, the town got blown away in a tornado. So they ended up selecting Hill City. And Pomeroy did put money in. They built the courthouse. He built a housing complex with about probably 6 or 8 houses that are called the Pomeroy houses. They still exist today. He put money into the businesses and established a business consortium right there on the main street, which is Highway 24. And the actual other main street in Hill City is called Pomeroy. And so Pomeroy and Hill really were in cahoots together, I believe that. And even though they said they were not in the business of building bridges, how can you justify 26 small bridges in the preceding county and then want to divert the railroad after you've said that you definitely want to put it on the north side of the Solomon River going into Hill City, and you put it on the south side? You create the town of Bogue, which, strategically pull the economic base out. But the other thing that happened too was the Highway 24. Highway 24 comes out of Stockton going west. It bypassed Nicodemus until the 1960s, 3 miles to the north of Nicodemus. Then after about 4 miles to the west, which is where Bogue is, the highway turns and goes south to connect up to the highway and moves on west towards Hill City. So they bypassed Nicodemus also with the highway. So I think those were strategic moves, because I don't think that was in the minds of those men at that time to bring prosperity to to a little all-black town, because it would have prospered, and probably more so than the county seat, which was Hill City, because they had the population, they had the wherewithal and the political power to do it.
Yeah, just to kind of re-emphasize that point a little bit, I'll put on my historian hat for a second. It also depends on when the settlement happened in Kansas. I consider Nicodemus early settlers, which is awesome. There was another migration into Kansas and that's known as the Exodus migration. Some of those, there were several small populations or towns in Kansas. They too settled in rural areas, and some of them were not able to settle on the best farmland. They weren't given some of those choice lots. So those towns too disappeared. Nicodemus is the longest lasting one. And again, it's partly because they weren't given access to the best resources to thrive and survive. But yes, they still settled. Chris, was there any more questions? We've got about 4 minutes left, or are we about, do we have to wrap up?
Yes, I
I'm not
know. It's
happy to wrap up, but do we have
no,
to?
it's so many good things to say here and questions and so forth. I did want to point out, it's in the chat as well. And again, the chat will be available along with the recording after, but there's another resource about a PBS genealogy journey on enslaved Africans at the International African American Museum. It's a PBS NewsHour link. So check that out in the chat if you can. And we're going to be kind of assembling these. We'll be able to put more information out to you on that. I also, and just, in the couple minutes left, Angela, one person wanted to ask you about the Ellis Trail.
Yes.
And then just to say, and then I'll come back after this too, but a couple people have asked more about opportunities to see historical reenactments or other kinds of big celebrations, for either Nicodemus or DeWitty. And so I know you've talked a little bit about that, but if you could just kind of reiterate anything upcoming that people would be able to attend.
Well, the Ellis Trail is the 35-mile trek from Ellis, where they got off the train, over to the town site of Nicodemus. We've been working for years now there's 6 signs that are out on the trail. So if you want to travel the way that the people did and learn about where they crossed the river, where they spent the night, where they got the first sight of Nicodemus, you can travel the Ellis Trail. We're in the process of redoing the brochure. And then we are also working on a documentary that's called The Ellis Trail, the last trek of the journey to the promised lands of Kansas. That should be out sometime in February, which really kind of highlights that last 35 miles to Nicodemus. We're hoping to do tours on the trail in the spring, as well as our Emancipation Celebration, which is always the last weekend in July.
Denise, do you guys have any upcoming events?
So right now they can go to Spotify and they can listen to different stories about the descendants of DeWitty. So that's ongoing. And so right now we're booking historical reenactments for the schools and different museums for the upcoming season. So I don't have anything that I can tell them right now, but they cannot go into the Omaha Public Schools when we're doing our historical reenactment. But
Sounds like they can access you virtually, though.
Yeah, or they can go to our website at Descendants of DeWitty, Nebraska.org and look at what upcoming events we have for 2024.
Awesome. Chris?
All right. Thank you. I think it's time to wrap up, unfortunately. You all have been amazing, and I just want to thank you so much, Donna Rae and Angela and Denise, for this really wonderful hour together. And I want to point out to people that all 3 of you are involved with your state humanities councils, Donna Rae and Angela with Humanities Kansas, and Denise with Humanities Nebraska, along with the other descendants of DeWitty. And so you can also book for different community events or anything through Humanities Nebraska Speakers Bureau, just like Angela and Donna Rae, their involvement with the Humanities Kansas Speakers Bureau. I want to thank the Humanities Nebraska team, Christy Hyatt Carley and Hannah Wrench and Sherilyn Hansen and Heather Thomas, and everyone for helping out. And again, to Humanities Kansas for helping us put together. We're so glad to know all of you. Thank you to all the wonderful people from all over who have been part of this hour together. There's a lot of great work happening to share these histories, and a lot of eagerness to learn them. So thanks again. We'd love to hear people's thoughts. We have a survey going out, and we can stay in touch with you all that way. We will let everybody know when the recording's available in case you want to share it beyond that. And then look for more such presentations in the future. And just a reminder, Humanities Kansas and Humanities Nebraska are funded by the National Endowment of Humanities. We're both funded by private donors, people like everybody on this call. Humanities Nebraska, we're also funded by the Nebraska Cultural Endowment in the state of Nebraska. And we just appreciate working with everybody. So I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.